Welcome to Section 2, Getting Comfortable with the Shell. Video 1, Launching the Shell and Basic Operations. Before we get into Video 1, I wanted to go over what we're going to be learning in this section, Getting Comfortable with the Shell. So the first thing that we're going to learn is how to actually launch the shell. We'll see how to launch the shell using both a local connection to a local database as well as a remote database server. We will then look into how we can use MongoDB's query language to query existing databases. We'll then see how we can use MongoDB's query language along with update modifiers to modify data, performing inserts, updates, and deletes. And finally, we'll look at how we can introspect and create and drop collection indexes on the MongoDB server. So without any further ado, let's get into Video 2.1, Launching the Shell and Basic Operations. So in this video, we're going to first see how to connect to a MongoDB server. Second, we're going to see how we can inspect databases and collections that are on that server. And third, we'll show how you can do simple collection operations. So for that, we're going to have to switch over here to the shell. The simplest way that we can connect to a MongoDB server is if we're running the server locally. And in that case, we just type Mongo. So you'll notice here I'm using MongoDB version 3.4.2. It was just recently released when I'm recording this video. By default, it's going to connect to localhost, which is 127.0.0.1, port 27017. I have a number of startup warnings. These we can ignore since I'm only running a development server on my local host. To exit out of the shell, I can type exit, or I can hit Control-D or Control-Z, depending on whether I'm on Linux or Windows. If I want to connect to a remote server, or I want to use authentication, there's a number of different options I can use. So in order to get a listing of those, I can do mongo-help. And you can see there's a number of different things we can do on the server. One of the simplest ways that we can connect to the server is by using a MongoDB connection string. So here I'm going to actually search in my history because it's quite a long connection string. So what I've done is I've set up a test server on MongoDB's Atlas hosted MongoDB service. And in this case, it's using a MongoDB URL to connect. So here I've provided my username, which is Rick, my password, which is packed, and after that I have a listing of all of the possible servers to connect to. These have to do with MongoDB replica sets, so it turns out I can connect to any one of these three and it's going to automatically figure out which one is the primary. At the end of that, I'm going to say which database I'm interested in this case the test database, and then I've got some flags that I need to set. So for instance, this is going to be an SSL connection, so it's secure and encrypted. I have to specify the replica set, and then my authentication source is the admin database. So in this case, it's saying my username and password are actually stored in the admin database. So if I run this, see it takes just a second, and it's actually connected to my Atlas cluster right now. So I'll exit out of that. There's also another way that you can connect using different command line arguments. So I'm going to search for that here, and this is equivalent to what I just did, except I'm not going to actually list all of the servers that I could possibly connect to. So in this case, it is Mongo. I've got the SSL flag, my username and password. I've got the host, which is one of the hosts that I could connect to. The port number, which is 27017, that's the default port for MongoDB, and finally the authentication database. So I run that. That happened to be the primary. If I'd connected to a secondary, it wouldn't have automatically switched me over to the primary because I didn't list all of the servers in the replica set in this case. All right, so now that we've connected to the database and we know how to do that, I want to show how you can actually do a couple of different things on the database server. So once we're connected here, we do have a database, which is the one that we've connected to by default. In this case, it's test, so I type DB, and it tells me it's the test database. So I can actually see all of the collections, or all of the databases on the server by saying show DBs. And it'll just list all the databases along with their sizes. So nothing too exciting right here. If I connect to my local server, you'll see that I've got a number of different databases which I've used for various other projects. One of the more interesting ones is the test database, so I'll go ahead and use test. That's how you can actually switch databases in MongoDB. And if I am looking inside the test database, I can actually say show collections. This is going to list all of the collections in the database for me. So in this case, I've got a number of different collections. I've got this restaurants data set, and in restaurants, I can actually look at particular documents by saying db.restaurants.find1. This is going to actually fetch a single document from the restaurants collection, And we can scroll up and see what the structure of that document is. So in general, you're going to be performing most of your operations on the collection. So the way that you get to the collection is use the DB variable here, the restaurants attribute of it, and then the find one. We can also access any of these by using JavaScript's indexing notation here. So I'll just do DB with a dereference of restaurants, and that still works. So one thing that I should mention is that this is a JavaScript shell. So anything that you can do in JavaScript, you should be able to do in this shell. So we can actually go ahead and put that restaurant into a document. So I'll say var doc equals restaurants.find1. I can then look at the document later on. I can update the document or just look at specific parts of it. So doc.grades, you see only the grades. Doc.grades 0, you can see a particular grade. So if you would like some more reference on different things you can do with the shell, different startup options, I've shown you most of the common ones, but you can always go to the MongoDB shell quick reference. That's on the MongoDB site. We have extensive documentation here where we can look at detailed docs on each one of the different operations we can do. And we can also look at some of the specific collection operations, and you can actually link out to that and find more detailed documentation on each one of the collection operations. So in this video, we've learned how we can connect to both local and remote MongoDB database servers, how we can list the databases and collections on a MongoDB server, and how we can select the active database by using use database name and perform collection operations on that server.